Worldwide, hundreds of millions of clinical cases of malaria occur, and millions of deaths occur. 80% of those are in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's part of the reason we focus on Africa. It's the problem is most pronounced there.
The medical profession is very human-centric. The majority of human disease is zoonotic. And so as we think about new infectious disease, or old infectious disease, or things like influenza outbreaks, what are these disease vectors between very often domestic animals and humans, or very often domestic animals, wildlife, and humans? What are the connections? What are the One Health dimensions?
Emerging Science is a Vermont Public Television production in partnership with and funded by Vermont NSF EPSCoR. EPSCoR, supporting science and engineering in Vermont colleges and businesses and encouraging young Vermonters to seek careers in science.
Hi, I'm Amy Seidel, and welcome to Emerging Science. This week our topic is disease transmission. We most often hear of the problems of disease transmission with the onset of epidemics. West Nile, Lyme disease, and the common flu persist locally, and HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria remain of global concern. When we investigated what Vermont researchers were focusing on in disease transmission, we found that much of their research occurs in Africa. Today we'll meet John Erickson, a UVM professor who works in Tanzania. Because many of the world's infectious diseases originate from domesticated animals or wildlife, increasingly scientists understand that individual disciplines are not enough. Cross-disciplinary work among medical doctors, veterinarians, and wildlife biologists are being pursued through the emerging concept of One Health. But first, we speak with Arna Bomblies. Arna is investigating the complex system of malaria transmission in an attempt to create a model that measures the impact of this African disease that kills millions each year.
In general, throughout Africa, especially the highland areas in Kenya, they have noticed increases in malaria incidence. Some people say that it's due to climate change, but the debate is heated and it goes on. Ultimately, we would like to have a predictive model linking climate change scenarios to what's happening on the ground in villages. We're working in the village of Waktala, which is near Jimma in the highlands of southwestern Ethiopia. You start with the recognition that without water available for mosquito breeding, there can be no malaria. The Anopheles mosquito, it's a specific genus of mosquito, is known to be the only possible transmitter of malaria. And it's an ongoing cycle of parasite between human stages and stages within the mosquito. The first step, I think, is to represent everything in a mathematical model, and then to go out into the field, validate our model, so we really have a lot of confidence in what we're predicting with our computer simulations. Well, a complex system is characterized by being nonlinear, dynamic, and disease transmission systems certainly have those two characteristics.
One variable in the complex model is how water collects. Pools of water need to exist long enough for the mosquito to develop into an adult. As Arna works to create a mathematical model that integrates the many complex variables associated with malaria transmission, one of the nonlinear variables is what he calls pool persistence. Without standing water, there are no mosquitoes, so pools must exist long enough for the mosquitoes to emerge as adults.
The Anopheles mosquito likes to breed in the small puddles that form as a response to monsoonal rainstorms. The persistence of the pools is influenced by topography and land use and land cover types, soil, vegetation, and so on. There are distinct villages, and they're surrounded by agriculture. 90-something% of the land is going to be covered by crops impacted by agriculture. Typically, when you have less vegetation cover, there's less root zone uptake of the water. There tends to be more crusting of the soil surface, and you typically have more runoff that forms. So that has obvious implications for pool formation and persistence. The adult mosquitoes, when they lay their eggs in these small ephemeral pools, typically have a batch, it's called a clutch, of a couple hundred eggs, which then hatch into 4 distinct stages of larvae called instars. After the 4th instar, they pupate. They remain as pupae for 1 to 2 days or so. Then they emerge as adult mosquitoes to continue the cycle. As pools form and persist, and after the development of the subadult mosquitoes has completed and they emerge as adult mosquitoes, typically the Anopheles gambiae mosquitoes would live on the order of 2 weeks or so. You could picture a large number of mosquitoes emerging from individual pools that would form sort of clouds of mosquitoes, all seeking their blood meals.
Once the female mosquito becomes an adult and leaves the pool, it goes in search of a blood meal, the nutrition she needs to lay eggs. If her blood meal victim is infected with a malaria parasite, the parasite then enters the female insect and completes its development. In time, the female mosquito will seek another blood meal, depositing the matured parasite into her next victim, often a human being. This is how malaria spreads from mosquitoes to humans. This relationship, however, introduces a second non-linear variable. The infected mosquito must live long enough for the parasite within to develop.
In climate simulations, they have the entire world, or in the case of regional climate models, just an area of interest gridded. Grid cells are typically tens, sometimes hundreds of kilometers in scale. Focusing in from that 100-kilometer scale down to the meter scale at the village is what we're really getting at here. There's going to be a whole lot of hydrologic variability, and there's going to be a whole lot of variability in the specific rainfall incident in the land surface within those 100-kilometer square areas. So there's a scale mismatch between climate models and between the characteristic scales of mosquito populations and small-scale catchments that feed into these breeding pools surrounding villages. And that's what we're trying to resolve.
During decades of drought in West Africa, the timing of rainfall has changed drastically. Intermittent and powerful storms are hard to predict, and deluge events often result in radical changes to the way water moves and pools on the landscape. Another component in this complex system is combining meteorological data on broad scales with more granular data gathered from specific sites.
To gather the validation, the model validation data, we need information for hydrology, local land cover types and soil types. We need information on what's happening with the adult mosquitoes, with the larval mosquitoes, as well as ideally with malaria prevalence within the community.
I'm a graduate student with the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at UVM. My undergraduate background is in ecology and conservation biology, so what was really appealing for me was to be able to merge the idea of ecological studies and biological studies with the problem-solving techniques and mechanics of engineering. We set up 7 stations. Altogether, they're monitoring the meteorological and environmental conditions, mostly weather-related. There's one meteorological station that measures everything from temperature and humidity, wind speed and direction, solar radiation, rainfall, and then also soil moisture at 4 different depths. And then we set up 4 additional stations that measured just soil moisture, also at 4 different depths of the soil, and then 2 water level stations. And I tried to choose locations that would sort of describe the entire area as a whole. I chose some locations that were directly in farmers' fields, so that they'd be affected by crops and land cover. I chose others that were in essentially bare fields, grazing fields, or the like. Obviously, there's the one station that does the meteorological, because rainfall should be relatively uniform over this whole area.
In addition to that, for the adult mosquitoes, we set light traps. These are then run overnight near where people sleep in their houses and as well as outside of their houses. We close the net in the morning and then take the nets back to the lab to identify all of the insects that we catch. That's how we get a handle for the variations in the mosquito population. For the aquatic stage mosquitoes, the larval stages, we hike around the area and we visit all of the pools that we can find or that we know of and sample weekly. And so that'll give us an idea of the temporal and spatial variability in the population. Once we've got all of the causations figured out in the model, we can play around with different intervention scenarios, eliminate individual pools. We can have bed nets distributed within the model and see what happens, things like that.
As Arna has explained, trying to quantify and predict disease transmission is no easy task, and complex systems modeling is at the very core of understanding these nonlinear dynamics. Next, we turn from vector-borne diseases to diseases that spread from immediate contact. As John Erickson explains, this type of transmission must be examined from an interdisciplinary lens. John introduces us to the concept of One Health.
I'm involved in a project in Tanzania called HOLLY, where we're trying to understand the drivers, social, environmental, economic drivers of disease epidemics.
It's located in southwest of Tanzania. It's a protected area.
Throughout Africa and indeed throughout the developing world, some of the highest areas of human population growth are around protected areas. They're one of the few places left where you're getting water, where you're getting wildlife, where you're getting forest products. We're seeing huge human population pressures emerge around these protected areas.
In the area that we are working, the Idodi division, we have got about 21 villages. And there are two divisions, Pawaga and Idodi. We are working with, there is a Maasai, Sukuma, and Barbei.
One Health is the idea that we're all part of the same system. One human health, one animal health, one wildlife health, one environmental health. Animals live in their environments, humans live in their environments. We're all part of the same environmental system. One of the particular diseases that we're looking at is tuberculosis. Work on tuberculosis has traditionally been very human-centric, you know, human-borne disease, human TB, how do we stop, how do we prevent tuberculosis? When off to the side, there's this threat of bovine tuberculosis jumping from cattle to humans. Well, tuberculosis is also found in wildlife species, and wildlife health professionals are struggling with the maintenance and health of wildlife species, particularly in national parks. National parks are, of course, a very important part of tourism and income earnings in Tanzania. So there's a whole other group of people looking at the decline of buffalo populations in Ruaha National Park and trying to understand, is there a connection here to tuberculosis found in wild buffalo? Our approach of dealing with TB here as a medical doctor and TB over here as a veterinarian and TB over here as a wildlife biologist, we really need to be thinking in terms of One Health. We need to be thinking of what are these vectors, what are the drivers, what are the broader landscape factors that drive the transmission of disease between species.